This morning, that's all for announcements. We are beginning a new series called Love Has a Name. And to begin our time together today, I want to ask you to think about how it feels when someone says your name. Now, I'm not talking about the mom and dad treatment where you get the first, middle, and the last name, because that frankly is never good, right? That when mom or dad's voice. So for me, still some people know my middle name, it's Eugene, so now you all know it. But when I hear Matthew Eugene, sometimes my sister or even Kristen will jokingly say that. It freaks me out because I know I'm in trouble. I don't like that. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when a friend, when someone that you know cares, people you care about, when they say your name, it's good, right? It's a bonding experience to be known. See, learning a name is often the first step to beginning a new friendship, a new relationship. It's the entry point, if you will, into someone's life. It's the doorway of connection to another person. And from that initial point, that starting spot, a bond can grow. And all of us have experienced specifically how love begins with a name. See, when someone knows your name, it makes you feel loved. It makes you feel noticed. You feel seen. See, when someone knows or someone even remembers your name, it proves that you are important to someone else. And when we think about our names and what that represents, it's bigger than just this name that gets written at the top of your paper when you're in grade school. A name represents a person's identity as an individual. It's their story of who they are. It's their past, which can be a little bit of goods, and it can be some bads at times, just some struggles. It's their successes and maybe even some of those failures and struggles mixed in. It's their background. It's their upbringing. Sometimes as a parent, that's always a little nerve-wracking, isn't it? It's part of their upbringing. It might even be part of their occupation. And around here, we say it. And I believe that we are really getting better, getting good at demonstrating how a person's name, their story, who they are, we say it matters. So this morning, as Jeff, thank you for reading that, Jeff read our main text. And so we're going to be looking at this story of Jesus and Zacchaeus. And it's a familiar text because if you've grown up around church at all, and especially if you grew up in church when you're little, we love this story. We retell this one to the kids all the time, probably because they're short in stature and so is Zacchaeus. And we think there's a good parallel there. I don't know. But we're going to retell and we're going to look at this a little bit, maybe differently or just a refresher. So at the beginning of our main passage that we did just read, we see that Jesus is passing through the city of Jericho. And in case you didn't know this, Jesus is actually, within just days, he's on his way to Jerusalem, where initially, we would know it as Palm Sunday, he's going to be celebrating. But we know how quickly that turns, and eventually he is crucified and then resurrects. But on this journey, we're told about a man there in Jericho named Zacchaeus, who collected taxes for a living. Now in the New Testament and throughout the Gospels, we get a lot of talk about tax collectors. So I want to give us a few more details about tax collectors so we're not just treating them really mean without the knowledge. So as a tax collector, Zacchaeus would actually overtax and cheat his own people out of money. Okay? He would get more money from them. And scholars discuss, because that just sounds like, well, how are you cheating people? Like, why are they just giving you this extra money? So scholars discuss a few ways that this was possible. So one of the first main ways that tax collectors would get more money out of the people is that as someone would come and to pay their tax, they wouldn't have enough to pay their tax. So what the tax collector would do would front them the money, would make a personal loan to cover their tax to be paid to the government. And of course, in giving that loan, a personal debt would charge a hefty interest rate to kind of keep the money always coming in on the side. Now think about this. If you can't already pay your tax, can you afford the interest rate on the tax money that you're now in debt to this person for? No. So this was a good plan for the tax collectors, not for the people, because it's just keeping them in a cycle of debt. We can never dig out of that. If you've ever dealt with any kind of bad credit card debt, maybe you felt that. Like, whoa, I can't dig out of this. This is not good. A second way that kind of partners with that In order to enforce this, they would utilize Roman soldiers to threaten and to beat and to even intimidate these citizens into accepting these collecting taxes and getting these extra money out of the general population. So those are a couple ways, like, if that doesn't make you go, oh, I get it, he would not be well liked. Yeah, those are a couple more reasons. So in the text, you might have caught this. We're told that Zacchaeus wasn't just any old tax collector, right? He was the chief tax collector. So the chief tax collector, this means that he would likely even make more money on top of just what he was collecting from the general population, because he would also take a cut from his subordinates, from those that worked under him. So, Zacchaeus would have been a pretty despised and hated guy in the community, even despised and hated by his coworkers, because who likes a boss that's actually dipping in your pockets too? That's not cool. And so, somehow, in the midst of all this situation where he's siphoning money out of pockets for his own gain, not being well liked, just doing his job, he knew that Jesus was coming to town. And Zacchaeus really wanted to see him. And I think about the fact that he wanted to see Jesus, and I want to ask the question, why? Why would this man, this wealthy scoundrel, let's call him, how's that? Scoundrel's a good fun word there. Why would he want to see Jesus? I mean, what was in it for him, since that's kind of how he operated? He was always looking for his own gain. I mean, had he not heard of the accounts of Jesus and his interactions with other people? And the fact that Jesus wasn't exactly nice to heartless, wealthy people? Now, unfortunately, in the text, we don't get those answers. But we're told that as Jesus is approaching, there's a problem. And the problem is Zacchaeus was really, really short. And if you grew up in Sunday school or that setting, you would know him as a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. Yeah. I knew you guys would be able to echo that, at least some of y'all. We've grown up with that. It was all about this poor little guy that just wasn't tall enough. But because of his short stature, what was going on? That he couldn't see over the crowd to see Jesus coming through town. So Zacchaeus had an idea. And we're going to look at the text just a little bit. This is verse 4 now of what we read. It says, so he, Zacchaeus, ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. But then, he climbs up this tree. There's a quick change of plans. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and he said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. Now, I don't want us to miss this, okay, because we get hung up on the stature of Zacchaeus, the short little guy. We miss some of these details. Jesus knows his name. He called out to him, specifically by name, up overhead in that tree. And I pondered, Jesus knew people's names, so that's part of it. Why would Jesus know his name? But really, why would Jesus call out to Zacchaeus? Now, this is reading into the text a little bit, but we can relate to some degree here that I'm guessing there were many times that Zacchaeus didn't really want his name to be known. If you're a shady dealer, you don't want your identity front and center with the people whose money you are siphoning from them. He likely didn't want to be confronted with how his selfish dealings were actually impacting the real people in their community. But not on this day. There was something different going on in this moment. Because Jesus, this great teacher, this notorious rabbi, and maybe even the promised Messiah, boy, this man knew his name, and Zacchaeus was excited about it. Verses 6 and 7 say this, so Zacchaeus came down at once and welcomed Jesus gladly. It says, all the people, which is the crowd, that community that he had been pulling money out of their pockets, they saw this, and they began to mutter, he is gone to be the guest of a sinner. See, the crowd wasn't having any of it. They're saying, why is this Jesus guy going to the house of a creep who's been stealing everyone's money? How could Jesus do that? What does he think that he is doing? But I want to remind you that this is a continuation of the Gospel of Luke's main themes. That first, Jesus identifies with sinners. Sorry, that was weird. With sinners. Basically, he's willing to spend time with those that need it most. And then the second theme that follows right after that is that how these new faithful followers who recognize Jesus as Lord, they discover a new life. They discover a transformed way to live based off of their encounter with the living God. Luke and all his stories, you can look for that. If you want to go home and tear through some chapters of Luke, look for that. These two themes. And right here, before we continue on with the text, I want to pause. And I want us to consider that if Jesus knows the name of a guy like Zacchaeus, folks, he knows our names. And that also means that he knows the names of all the other people in our lives too. Jesus knows the names of the people who have hurt us. He knows the names of our neighbors who might think and vote a little differently than us politically. He knows the names of our coworker who is kind and of our coworker who is just kind of strange. He knows the name of our spouse. He knows the name of our ex. He even knows the names of those spam emailers and those dirty, rotten phone call scammers that are everywhere right now. He knows their name. He knows the names of the know-it-alls that we interact with out on Facebook and Twitter and on social media. And Jesus even knows the names of the people, the random strangers that we meet in line at the store. Jesus knows them. He sees them as a person who's worthy of love, and he knows their name. Do we? Do we see these people as a person? Do we want to know their names? See, to the crowd that day, Zacchaeus was this gross offender, because he was. He was a nasty tax collector, because he was. And he was a thief. Yeah. But to Jesus, he was Zacchaeus. He was a man that he knew, and he was going to get to know more. And Jesus used his name. And because of that, there is this massive transformation taking place. And it takes place rather instantaneously that day for Zacchaeus. So here in response to Jesus in front of the muttering crowd, we'll pick it up in verse 8. This is what we're going to repeat here. It says, Zacchaeus stood up and he said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything," which is kind of like a duh, the whole community knows that one, "I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." Something remarkable took place when Jesus called out to Zacchaeus. I like to think of it this way. He had his Grinch moment where his heart grew 3 times, if you know that book or the renditions on screen. It's as if that when Jesus spoke his name and saw him, he looked up in that tree and he says, "Zacchaeus." Zacchaeus all of a sudden begins to see individuals around him, not just groups of people. He actually begins to see them in their names, their identity, their stories. In that moment, Zacchaeus came face to face with the people that he had overlooked, that he had taken advantage of, that he had manipulated for his own well-being. And it's amazing because he no longer wanted to live that way. He had to acknowledge his wrongdoing and begin the work of making it right. See, no longer were these just community members around him just categories of people that he had labeled, that he could easily, just overlook or tread upon or just take money out of their pockets. Instead, his eyes were opened and his heart began to be transformed to see them as people, specifically as people he had wronged. I already said it this morning, but folks, he went from a them and me to an us. I've said it before, but folks, there is no us versus them. There is only us. There's humankind, created in God's image. And see, Zacchaeus had to be the one to repair what he had broken. He had to be the one to refund the people that he had defrauded. And in order to correct what was wrong and to demonstrate a truly transformed heart and mind and life, way of living, Zacchaeus had to be the one to participate in the making things right for each person he had harmed. So he acknowledges the wrong that he had done by naming it. He then commits to honestly deal with the wrongs without minimizing or diminishing the impact it had on the people that he had robbed. And what I mean by that, it's a short statement, but there's no caveats in there. He doesn't say, well, I'll try to make this right, but they got to do their part. Some of these people came to me and they couldn't pay their taxes. There's no caveats. He just says, I'm going to make it right. He doesn't diminish or minimize. See, for Zacchaeus to speak up and declare what he was going to do to repair the brokenness was to be brutally honest and to take ownership of what he had done. And the cool part is, by speaking it out loud in front of that muttering crowd, he was making a public commitment to following through. Now, I find it so interesting in this text, and as you listened when Jeff spoke it, maybe hearing this again, that Jesus didn't command Zacchaeus to do any of this. In previous encounters, like the rich young ruler, which is actually just the previous chapter in the book of Luke, he tells him what to do. Jesus doesn't command any of this. Rather, Zacchaeus initiated because he knew that he had been seen. Jesus looking up into that tree, Zacchaeus. He knew that he was known, and folks, it changed him. And it opened his eyes to begin to see others the same way, which is again another theme with Jesus. Jesus is always going around and he's inviting other people to start to see as he sees. Now it's likely, I hope, how's that for a caveat there? It's likely, I hope, that you and I, here in this space, joining online, you're hearing this, that we have not robbed from others. Specifically, we haven't implicitly taken from other people in the way that Zacchaeus was doing that. But let's consider the people, the neighbors that we have, the folks around us in our communities, where you live, that we have neglected by simply ignoring their names, ignoring their voices, their stories, their individual personhood, their dignity, their value. See, unfortunately, many of us, and you'll notice I say the us word because it's me too. Many of us, we've given into seeing people as either in agreeing or in opposing groups and teams, all at the expense of seeing people as a person. And as we talked last time, 2 weeks ago, we talked about unity. Folks, this phenomenon that's happening all around us right now is pitting humanity against each other, and it's dividing us. It's not helpful. And then at a spiritual level, I think we have gotten dangerously comfortable. Hear that word. Dangerously comfortable with dismissing a person's inherent value, which is the imago Dei. It is being an image bearer. We have dismissed that by placing them into our most simple categories, by categorizing them and labeling them, because that way it's just easier to place them over there so I can ignore them. Or even worse, I can dehumanize them. That's dangerous. As those who believe we have woken up to the Spirit of God, we cannot do that. We, like Zacchaeus, will have to name the damaging things that we have done, the harmful things that you and I might still be participating in. And we do that in order that we can move into a more hopeful future together. But this is difficult. And maybe this hits you a little off right now because maybe you're in that. It's hard. This is difficult work because naming the wrongs and the hurts and the errors, it's always very sobering, isn't it? Frankly, I think it's just hard to hear that Jesus is calling each one of us, you and me, by our names, to go in a different direction at times than we want to go. But in order to see people as Jesus sees them, we will have to know the names. That means their stories, the identities of the people that we have discarded, that we have labeled, that we have written off. And we do that in order that we too would begin to see them as valuable and worthy of love. Because we understand that that muttering crowd that day, think about that crowd. These folks had been truly victimized. They had been victimized by the system that Zacchaeus perpetuated and benefited from. And we know from our own experiences too that it would be difficult to simply just take Zacchaeus at his word, right? Oh, sure, that nasty tax collector who's been swindling us for years, he's just going to really change in a matter of moments. We get that. But it was in the following through. In that following through, there's an ability to begin the work of repairing what is broken. It's the work of demonstrating a true repentance, a true transformation. See, the simplest way to love someone is to know his or her name. Know their uniqueness. Get to know the person and the story behind the name. Do you want to partner with God in his restoring work here and now? Know their name. Do you want to help someone? Know their name. Do you want to point someone to Jesus and to the better life that you've experienced and the freedom that comes with knowing Christ? Know their name. Do you want to actually let someone know that you care? Know their name. I think most of us would say yes to all of these things. We want to participate in that. We genuinely want to help others. We want to let them know we care. We want to see them experience the love of Christ. And folks, that love begins with a name. The book of James in chapter 3, verse 17 says this. James writing to us, to the church, says, the wisdom that comes... Dave, this should be up on the screen here. Follow along here, folks. James 3:17. The wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. So with that scripture fresh in our minds here as we begin to wrap up, a couple actionable steps. Because I want to offer these ways that we can put into action this idea of knowing other people's names and then making space for the Spirit of God and how he's going to move us into seeing people the way that Jesus does. And so as we dive into these, I want to remind you too, this is what Jesus models throughout his time on earth, captured in 4 gospel accounts. And the first actionable step for you today is respond first with understanding. Respond first with understanding. See, many of us give our full attention to someone's expressions and their opinions, and we don't nearly give enough attention to the emotions behind what they are saying and doing. I mean, we know that when a person is angry, they often say things that they don't mean. And you know how we know that? Because when we're angry, we often say things that we don't mean. Can I get an amen? I don't usually ask it for amens, but I want to make sure that I'm not the only one saying stupid things when I'm angry. Okay? Thank you. Yes. I mean, we are all prone, right, to exaggerate and use words that we really don't intend to use when we don't have that in check. So instead of just listening for the words, listening only to the opinions that we don't like and we don't agree with, look for the emotions behind the words. Because this is a truth, too, that so often it's hard to say what we mean Because there's a lot of things that are just hard to put into words, right? They're hard to say in the right way. But each of us always feels what we are feeling. A common scenario in my house is this. One of the kids might screw something up or maybe a little mistake, or just it could be really goofy, strange things, but they'll say, "I'm such a dummy." That's their response. And we've tried hard, and I'm not going to tell you that we're really good at this, but we've tried really hard not to just dismiss what they said by quickly saying, "You're not dumb." Instead, and I'll give Kristen credit, she's much better at this, we're trying to say things like, "Why would you say that? Why do you feel that way?" And the reason is because we're doing this because we care, and we're trying hard to look beyond words being said in order that we would actually begin to uncover the real issue. See, for us to really experience how love begins with a name, we will need to first react with understanding and being considerate of feelings. And folks, this means that we cannot afford here as followers of Christ to be easily offended or easily provoked. We must focus on being mindful of what other people are experiencing and what they're going through. I shared with you my story about a friend 2 weeks ago that I had really hurt. This is what I'm talking about. This is firsthand experience for me. I was not aware of all that was going on in that person's life. We have to be aware of that. Because when people are a bit offensive at times, that happens. When people seem heartless, the reality is usually they're in a lot of pain. They're dealing with some heaviness that they may not be able to fully process yet, or maybe they just don't even know how to process what they're going through. And unfortunately, many of us, we've found this out, maybe on a regular occurrence, that hurt people tend to hurt people. So in order for us to participate in letting love actually begin with a name, we need to react first with understanding. And then the second one follows right with this. We have to do the work to validate others' feelings and experiences, even if they aren't shared. Sit with that for a second. Unfortunately, when we don't feel the same emotion that someone else feels, it's really easy for us to just dismiss all of their feelings and all their experiences altogether. I know you've all experienced this. So you're in a vehicle, or you're in this room. It could be this room. And you are really hot. And inevitably, someone else is really cold. And I see Linda covering up a little. So flip that around. Maybe you're the person, you're like, "I am always cold. And why is that person always hot?" Isn't it crazy? It's mind-boggling, especially in a small vehicle. How can you be experiencing the same exact situation differently? Right? Isn't that crazy how you can experience it differently? And now the good news is, most of the time, unless it's maybe someone in your family, because then it's a little harder, we come to some kind of thermostat understanding. Sometimes, hopefully. And we all navigate that. The car battle is, it's nice they made the dual climate control things and those fancy new ones. But so we usually come to thermostat understanding. But then, in other real life situations with other people, why do we attempt to argue over or diminish what other people are feeling and what other people are experiencing? Does that seem so outlandish if we think about just this moment in a vehicle? It's possible that someone is experiencing very similar things completely differently. See, when any of us dismiss someone else's feelings, we are actually minimizing the other person. And just like Zacchaeus, that becomes very dangerous, that you can start to dehumanize and label people. You see them as less than. The reality is our feelings are not simply a right or wrong. Feelings are not only good or bad. They just are, and you've heard me say this so many weeks in a row, but it's just part of the human experience. You're going to have feelings. See, none of us has to go about defending our feelings, and we shouldn't expect this of others either. Each of us just truly needs to be listened to, or to be doing the listening. To say to others, "I hear you." We need to hear, "I hear you" back at us. See, with the model of Jesus and the wisdom that he imparts to us through his Spirit, each of us can begin to take notice of and then even validate the feelings and the experiences of others. The cool part is you can let your family member feel tired and not try to just talk them right out of it. You can let your friend sit with some sadness and not move to quickly try to cheer them up. As that James scripture said to us, the one we just read, wise people are considerate of other people's feelings. C.S. Lewis says it like this. He says, for what you see and hear, and this, it is right there. There we go. For what you see and hear depends a good deal on where you are standing. It also depends on what sort of person you are. See, the remedy for living a life that is focused only on self is to actually begin being considerate of others first. That's the remedy. You got to do the work. That's the actual model of Jesus Christ, by the way. And he is calling us. He's calling people to see how he sees people. And folks, a great way for each of us to begin to start that new focus, if you need a fresh start or a new start, is to begin with a name, because love begins with a name. Let's pray.